What is up, Call of Duty fans? Al and IHOLDSHIFT down at Frio back with you. And again, it seemed like most of you guys wanted me to do the recap every other day. So we'll do them on Tuesdays and then Thursdays. We'll see how that goes. I'm not sure how much I like it. Part of me wants to be a little bit more comprehensive with these and do each individual days. But the other part of me would like the time to kind of get all the graphics in a good spot and make sure the production quality is good enough to do it, so that way we'd have it in 2-day forms. We'll just see how this first week goes, and if you guys like it, we'll keep doing it. If you kind of want more in-depth breakdowns, maybe we'll do more individual days and just shorter time periods. We'll see how things go, but let's dig into it. So CWL first week of regular season gameplay kicked off on Monday. 2 games were scheduled, and then it'll be the 4 games for the rest of the other 3 days. So Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday loaded with 4 games apiece starting at 3 o'clock Eastern time. And just to remind you what the divisions look like in case you weren't 100% sure what they were, here is what Division A and B look like. Again, in this first week, we would just be seeing Division A playing, and the schedule as you see it pop up would be as you see it. So we had Red Reserve and Reciprocity battling up against each other first, OpTic and Midnight, and this was going to pan out to be a very interesting first day, at least by how the scorecard would call it, as you had again the twins between Weskin and Scraps fighting up against each other, 2 EU teams as well, also battling it out first and foremost to start the CWL, and then OpTic. A lot of people had them, and rightfully so, I would say, have them as the best team in Call of Duty right now, playing up against a squad that a lot of people have at the top 6, top 5 potentially, as they had a very dominating performance at the PLQ, but this would be their first real true test against a top 4 team, at least as we would anticipate it to be against OpTic in their first game out. So let's take a look at what the scorecards had to say. Reciprocity, Red Reserve, a lot of battle and a lot of comments going back and forth between the twins, but this day would be won pretty decidedly by Red Reserve. It was a 3-0, and pretty much all 3 maps were relatively convincing, starting things off with a 250 to 93 hardpoint. That'll sure set things in motion, and then the 6-4 S&D and the 3-2 control. Honestly, Red Reserve looked like a top 5 team. They were competing and looking very solid on rotations, winning gunfights. Scraps was popping off, looking like potentially one of the best players in the game alone. So a lot of things going in the way of Red Reserve. But again, as you remember back, well, I had these guys in my power rankings a little bit lower on the spectrum simply because the inconsistencies were so huge when it came down to this team and what they were able to offer. And then we would go to our second match, OpTic versus Midnight, and we got the news a little bit later, or I guess earlier in the day, later, at least as I perceived it, as around noon, a little bit after that, that Dashy would not be playing for OpTic due to visa issues from him coming from Canada. Has to get that work visa renewed, and I guess didn't get it done in time. So call up the Italian stallion, Tommy, aka ZooMaa, from FaZe, again on loan, which is a conversation in its own, would be jumping in and subbing in for OpTic. And again, if you know the side of FaZe and what ZooMaa plays, he's an SMG player. Played most of the SOG completely without any other question, but TJ and Scump also play SOG. So there were questions on what was going to happen with the weaponry. Not only that, but also the specialists that would possibly be used. OpTic, they would put up a pretty decent fight up against Midnight in the first one. It would be a very close hard point, but then from there, it was just all Midnight running away with all of how lost OpTic was. It was a 3-0, 250 to 215 on the hard point. OpTic did not want to go away after the hard point, but you could see the troubles were more than just a couple of gunfights, as the S&D was decidedly in Midnight's favor, and then a pretty stompy 3-0 control for Midnight, who I don't want to take anything away from Midnight because this is an absolutely real team that they look like they're ready to perform at the highest level against anybody, but it does kind of detract a little bit the fact that they're playing up against an OpTic who was a little bit out of sorts with very little to no practice with ZooMaa whatsoever. But regardless, not a good start for the Green Wall. So you take a look at what Tuesday was going to look like. Gen G would get their go against Red Reserve. Evil Geniuses on Midnight. OpTic with the chance to resurge against UIU. And then Luminosity with their first go since Vegas against Reciprocity. Starting off with Gen G and Red Reserve. And goodness, we've heard this before many times. Gen G against this team, they're undefeated against them in matches, but they always lose the first hard point. That would happen again here, and then from there, it was all Gen G all the time. 167 to 250 in the first hard point, but this would end up going Gen G's favor decidedly as they get themselves a 6-2 easy on Search and Destroy. The control was actually really close, a 3-2 there, but in the last hard point, it was all Gen G, 250 to 140. This is a team that, again, as we talked about, I had them a little bit lower on the standings simply because of their PLQ performance. They were really slow to start, and they did not look good at all. And even still, I've got questions about Spacely because he did not perform all that well throughout. It was a lot of the Havoc show today against Red Reserve. Evil Geniuses on Midnight. A lot of high expectations for Evil Geniuses. Again, with Revan behind the helm, you know they're going to come prepared. But Midnight obviously showing up that they're able to perform against top players and top teams. Would that echo true here against Evil Geniuses? The answer would be, again, a very close hard point, followed by Midnight running away with this one. 3-0 for Midnight. 250 to 222 was that first hard point, and goodness, Evil Geniuses, they were in a spot to take that one away, but Midnight, again, on the comeback. It was about 60, 70 points, most noticeably, for a long stretch of time. I think it got to be as bad as about 100 at one point in time. Midnight fought back, able to retake control on the hard point and win that first map, and then from there on out, it was all business. A 6-3 and then a 3-0 on the Search and Destroy, and then the control. This team is so good. They're going to be sitting up near the top now, 2-0, 6-0 in maps, completely flawless. A great, perfect start from Midnight against two really solid teams. OpTic with their chance to resurge. They got UIU. Again, a lot of controversy with methods jumping into the roster for UIU for spoofs who would just be immediately put to the substitute role. And at first, it was very shaky for both teams. A lot of controversy just in the early hard point. It looked really chaotic to start things off, but this would eventually go the distance to 5. Fortunately for OpTic, they would be able to hold on. It was a very close set, though. My goodness, the first 4 maps, a couple gunfights one way or the other, and very well could have been UIU walking away with it or OpTic walking away with it without having to go to map 5. But then we got to the last Search and Destroy, and OpTic, it looks like the rehearsal is paying off, even if it is in a live competitive environment against another team that, you know, in league play. It wasn't just a scrim, but the 6-0 and the Search and Destroy, OpTic looked like they're starting to kind of find themselves once again. But honestly, UIU is a team that they need to beat. So the fact that they barely escaped them, a little bit of cause for concern still. Again, playing without Dashy today. So throughout the rest of the week, actually, just forget that conversation. No Dashy for the rest of the week. The last game of the day, Luminosity taking on Reciprocity. And LG, well, I had them a little bit lower. I think at the 6th spot of my power rankings. This was a team that played really fluidly when they were playing at Vegas, but that was 2 months ago. What's happened since then? Have they had a chance to adapt, relearn some of the new meta things when it comes to loadouts and stuff like that, and actually take it to a solid team? Reciprocity would take this one all the way to 5, and all of the sets were very, very good. If you've got the time, go back and rewatch this one because it was a very close set. The 250 to 236 on the hard point and a 6-3 to start things off for Rec. They would go up 2-0. Luminosity, though, would swing back 3-2 on the control, 250 to 242 on the hard point that Reciprocity should have been able to put away, just weren't quite able to do it. LG looking really solid, but wouldn't be able to close things out as it would be a 6-4 on the Search and Destroy. My biggest question mark with Luminosity, 4 out of the 5 members came to play today. Slacked? Might as well change that D at the end of the game to an R because he was negative about the entirety of all 5 maps. And that was my biggest question mark because they have not officially confirmed a substitute spot. Ricky from Pittsburgh has been kind of the coach so far, but honestly, you need to pick up somebody who can rock that flex role if you're LG at this point in time because things are not looking so solid for them. I'm a little bit worried for this team going into UIU tomorrow. We'll take a look at that schedule in a moment, but the fact that they weren't able to get past Reciprocity, and again, credit to Zed because he was playing out of his mind, as Shawnee as well. I mean, the whole team from Rec looked really solid today compared to how they looked yesterday against Red Reserve, and they needed to bounce back after that one. But let's take a look at what's going on for tomorrow, where some of my concerns lie. Gen G taking on Reciprocity, Luminosity on UIU, Midnight taking on Red Reserve, and Evil Geniuses on OpTic. Let's start off with Gen G and Reciprocity. I'm a little bit nervous about this one because Reciprocity has looked good, but so has Gen G. For me, it comes down to who's going to show up alert, awake, and ready to go because both teams have had their looks of solid gameplay. I think the fact that Reciprocity will be bouncing off of a very close game versus Luminosity, they'll be feeling good about themselves, but Gen G, for me, this comes down to if you can beat Red Reserve, you should be able to beat Reciprocity simply because of what happened on Monday, but can you stay consistent? Can Spacely actually step up and start to perform? Because he's not been really kind of showing off the team name that was Team Space. Doesn't really seem to be that much more merited. Maybe they should have been calling it Team Havoc. And then you look at the second set of the day, Luminosity and UIU. This is a good one, honestly. UIU, again, against OpTic. All 5 of those games, but 4 out of the 5 of those maps were really close. And honestly, this one could go either way with the way that Luminosity has played. Slack needs to show up. He needs to start winning more isolated gunfights because he can't just keep being the bait and switcher the entire time. It's not the way that this game goes. You have to be able to win gunfights every now and again on rotations, and Slacked has not been on the better end of that. UIU, meanwhile, has looked good. Mayhem in specific, I gotta shout that guy up, because Mayhem and Methods, that little tandem duo has been locking things down in the rotation game on the respawn. So the big key, kind of the inner battle to look at, is that Slacked versus Mayhem kind of stat line. Midnight Red Reserve. Got to go with Midnight on this one. I mean, again, they look so solid. Red Reserve, they've shown up against Reciprocity. They looked really strong, but they didn't look nearly as good against Gen G. Scraps looked to be like the one-man wonder on Red Reserve, and they need to have everybody else kind of start to show up a little bit more. I think Midnight probably improves to not only 3-0, but I would not be surprised if they did it in a 3-0 fashion. So could we potentially see the 9-0 Midnight Esports team through 3 days of Pro League? That'd be insane. And then Evil Geniuses and OpTic. Honestly, this is going to be a close one. I really like the way the Evil Geniuses played, honestly, against Midnight. There weren't that many opportunities or noticeable moments where it was like Evil Geniuses is just bad. They were just getting outslayed, flat out, is what it came down to. The hard point was close. The search and destroy, a couple kills here and there. That's a totally different scoreline than 6-3. And the control, well, Midnight just kind of ran away with it, honestly. I mean, their control gameplay is great, but OpTic has not looked solid throughout their control so far. The 3-2, the 0-3. Evil Geniuses, I got them kind of pulling this one. I hate to say it, Greenwall fans, but they have to show up, and, you know, they have to be studying a lot. You got to know that Teep and the rest of the gang for OpTic are going to be doing the work, but Evil Geniuses are just as smart, and they're going to be able to take a look at where the weaknesses currently are with OpTic, with ZooMaa in that lineup. So I'm really excited to see this game go through. We'll switch back through and take a look at the standings as well as what the schedule looks for on Thursday. Here's how they fit after 2. Midnight up top. Gen G, again, only having played 1 game, is the only team at 1-0, so they'll be sitting in second. OpTic Gaming and Red Reserve and Reciprocity all sitting at 1-1 apiece. And then you look a little bit further down, the 0-1 of Luminosity, UIU, and Evil Geniuses thus far. And then Thursday, the schedule coming up after Wednesdays tomorrow. We've got Midnight, UIU, OpTic, Reciprocity, Red Reserve, Luminosity, and Gen G will finish off the rest of the week against Evil Geniuses. A lot of close games in there for sure. I don't want to give out too many predictions because we're already kind of hitting the time limit that I wanted for this style of video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Let me know what you think about the 2-day recap, what you would have liked to hear more of or less of. I can go as far or as little into some of the topics that we've hit so far in these videos. I really want to make sure that this kind of content is tailored towards you guys, the audience, because again, I want to be your preference when it comes down to the CWL recaps. But until then, I'll see you guys on Thursday. And while we're at it, again, I want to big shout outs to COD Gamepedia. Again, I'm one of the content creators for that team, but if you're looking for more information on what's going on in the league while I'm not making videos, make sure you check them out at COD Gamepedia. And then as well, on Thursday nights, you can catch me casting the Collegiate Call of Duty League over on College COD Twitch. That starts at 8:30 Eastern, just after the game should just be finishing up in the CWL. Then on Friday, we've got the CCL bringing you Friday Night Fights. Last week, I got to cast that one with Benson. It was a lot of fun. Not sure what the docket looks like for this week, but that'll be happening at 9 o'clock Eastern time to get your weekend started off nice and tightly. I don't know what that means, but we're going to go with it. I've been Shift. You've been you. Thanks for hanging out with me on the recap. Until next time, hope you keep holding it down. Later. Bye-bye.